No, I just wanted to ask who read the manifest.
I read the manifesto, but last week ago, and I really like this word that means like a mess. I mean, it's like it's not a bear, right? It's like the name of the city.
It's a
Mountain.
Yeah, mountain.
So it was. I mean, it's quite. It was a war between Italy and right?
Ethiopia.
Ethiopia. Yeah. I really like the concept of this experimental, messy
methodology.
background.
I mean, I for me it was very interesting because you guys were trying to portray a different picture. Like there's always a historical perspective which is written by the kind of winners. Like only they get the voice to write the history, right? But you guys were trying to topple it down by saying the other way, saying there's also a certain cause and certain roots of the people who fought the war and stuff, and we are trying to address them and their efforts in that too. So that was very interesting for me.
Yeah, exactly. It's like conceptually the name like clicked us so much immediately when we heard it. But I don't know, sometimes I feel like if do we sound so assertive, like talking about, because we suffered so much from architectural education. Yes. So we want to like kind of like upside down all the architectural pedagogy. Hello. So, but it should also change, and I think it's part of it because we achieved part of our education in Italy, and I think it's so substantial to feel that, how to say, institutional knowledge there. Like the things about architecture is like the rules are so solid, and you are facing that you had no voice. Like individually it's okay, but culturally you had no voice in that written history, and it kind of bothers both of us. I don't know, how was your experience then? Yeah.
Well, I think the level of education at Politecnico wasn't that high. I mean, I didn't knew until I was there that the master is like the 4th and 5th grade. And my bachelor in Mexico is 5 years. So for me, master is the 6th and 7th year. So I was kind of going back, and my expectation was higher. But the thing that I learned the most is, I mean, I'm aware that Italy is one of the countries that has a lot of history in architecture, and to live there, to learn the language, it was like a huge step in my education. I mean, I was traveling a lot around Italy, around Europe, etc. So, and also by learning Italian, I started to read a lot of books. I met Renato Ricci, and I had access to more information. And the thesis with Barbara Bogoni was quite okay. So even if the classes I didn't like them, my experience was quite, it really fulfilled me. I really learned a lot of things. I think I'm a better designer now because I have this kind of aesthetic sense much more profound than before. I have this criteria that I'm looking for more accurate, more precise, much more rich. So I think that I wouldn't. I mean, if I had the same master's degree in UK, I think I wouldn't learn the same. I mean, I think living in Italy is an experience in itself. One of my professors says that he posted on Instagram the movie Morte a Venezia, Dead in Venice, and he said that watching this movie is better than education in any of the universities of city. He said that watching this movie it educates better the architects that the student 6 months in any university around the world. I mean, I think the experience of living in Venice is unique as an architect.
It's interesting.
I'd like to though that even though it's very interesting and it's a unique experience, but you still feel that the architectural education field, not just in Italy, but in Italy or before, does it give people a lot of space to go out of the confines? Although they say that there are no confines and people can do whatever, but is there, for example, an openness to new ideas, to new ways of doing things, or it's very stuck on you know, the history or the institutionalized way that people think they need to do things? Like, for example, a lot of people would say like, okay, this is the way architecture is taught and this is the way people need to do things. So there are certain expectations that in architectural education, these things won't change because this is the way the system has worked for, I don't know, since whenever architectural education in universities started.
I mean, I think that different universities have kind of different how could I say, not
School of
programs.
Thoughts. School of Thoughts.
Yes, yes. For example, one of the universities that I was looking for that I really like is the one in Mendrisio. And they have this kind of actually, if you read the program of Mendrisio, they talk about because it's Switzerland, but in the canton of Ticino, they say that they have the background of Swiss technology, but they have the aesthetics and arts of Italy. So, I mean, the university where I studied here in Mexico is Jesuit. So they have this kind of humanistic approach, very social consciousness, and it's totally different. I mean, it's much more humanistic, and there wasn't that much approach about serious. I mean, it wasn't focused in architecture that much. So when I was in Politecnico, I mean, everything was about architecture. I mean, especially the campus Mantua, everything is about architecture. Everyone is talking about architecture. So it's like a totally different focus. So I think, as Ezra says, the School of Thoughts is very important in each university. I mean, if you see the one in CCI in LA, it's like parametric design and all that bullshit that I don't like that much.
Yeah. I mean, for me, like back in India is similar to you, Daniel, about humanistic approach and those kind of principles. Because back in India, we didn't have a single history, because we were always been ruled by different countries. I mean, maybe like England, and we had people from Mughlai and maybe from the Arabic regions, and they brought Iran. I mean, the architectural style of Iran, and me being especially from a from a city where majority of the people, not majority, maybe it's a well-balanced city of people from different religions. So even now we do have, I mean, back in India, the architecture itself depicts like we didn't have a particular style. So each one of them brought their own religious and their own stuff that their own style of architecture to our country. So even so that tried to create a complete different atmosphere where we were like, okay, which architectural style should we adapt? So lack of a particular style has made us to create, I mean, maybe think architecture towards more like design of a space more than a form of the building, and the design of experience over the building. Then when I moved over here to United States, it's a complete different program. Like I mean, I did my master's at University at Buffalo. It's like towards topmost near to Canada and northernmost point of New York. So here, though we were in like cold, it was so complete cold weather, and we had we were trying to design, and most of my professors are from Harvard, and most of them from abroad, like from few are from Italy, Turkey, and I mean, it's a global assimilation, and the same thing which I've experienced over there, and it came to the masters as well, like where teachers were trying to bring in examples of different architects from their own region, so that we would have much more diversity in thought and diversity in discussion. But in that whole process, I was like, okay, and also I got into a lot of making things. The university has resources for making any like technological advances in terms of materials and culture. That's my sphere of interest that I've chosen in masters. So where we were trying to establish a relationship between the building materials and the culture of a region. So maybe Mexico might have a different kind of soil, and that could be represented, that could have been seen in your historic houses throughout maybe in the past generations, right? And how we could introduce technology into that material and try to use that material into the modern day world. And so that was my scope of masters, and that's where I was like, okay, while doing research mostly with the natural materials, that's where I felt like, okay, if we could take this to the next level, this would be my style. Instead of picking an architectural style, I could create spaces, create beautiful spaces just with natural materials. I don't have to be like natural and regional materials. I don't have to I could admire buildings by other guys, maybe like Big or UN Studio or Norman Foster, who has a typical style of glass buildings throughout, which could be placed throughout the world anywhere, but it doesn't reflect the nativity of the people and stuff like that. So sorry, go ahead.
No, you go ahead.
Yeah, so
Are you
that's
done?
what yeah.
Now, I have a very similar point with Amal. Like in Italy, there's very strong school of thought in architecture, art and design, and also in Italian culture, design and architecture is a very unique place. Like very normal people understand a lot about architecture. That's very important, and that's not familiar in my hometown, or I don't know, also in Mexico or Sudan. But also I really admire and appreciate Italian aesthetics. architecture, and I get their educational point. Like these people come all around the world to learn this stuff, so we need to teach them the best way as we can. But the point bothers us the most is the closeness of the dialogue, and there's no any little interest of other architectures. Like that's the way, that's the stuff we know the best, and we will teach you, don't worry kind of attitude. Okay, that's fine, but just let me bring a bit of, like, I don't know, the word is hybrid, or how to say, like mixing any penetration to the like design aspects from other cultures wasn't allowed, except maybe like in general also today's like contemporary Italian architecture allows mixing with Scandinavian architecture, maybe a bit Japanese architecture, and that's all. Like you won't see any other cultural aspects in the Italian architecture. So this can be problematic. That's what we want to discuss. Okay, like we don't completely deny the Italian aesthetics or their mission about teaching. Of course, like there is our openness to like willing to learn all those stuff. But can't we have any critical point on them? Or even like Italian aesthetics can be sometimes so ambiguous, like they're just like either banal or perfect, and like they don't leave any room for gray stuff, and for me that's a bit annoying. Like, and even like sometimes compromising from functionality, which is complete opposite of my origins of like school of thought in Turkey. And they don't even bother themselves to explain why. It's like very like traumatizing some architectural students.
Yeah.
I mean, as you said, the education that I saw at Politecnico is that it's European centered. It's like, I mean, here in Mexico, we used to have classes of Renaissance, particularly Renaissance. And we have an Italian professor from Modena. He was an excellent professor. But I mean, of course, Politecnico at least is like European centered. You don't talk about Asia, you don't talk about India, you don't talk about South America. And I think that's okay. I mean, that's why I decided to go there to learn more. I mean, I saw some masters in Denmark and Belgium, and the one that I was much more interested in was in Italy. I mean, not Politecnico, but Italy. And I think that the aesthetics, the focus in aesthetics is something that I appreciated a lot, and especially with concepts based on the knowledge of history, because some universities don't care about history. They just want to do new things. And I was reading this book of Adam Caruso. I think it's the History of Feelings. Do you know Adam Caruso, this British architect?
No.
Okay, Adam Caruso is like a really well-known British. I know he's Canadian. He's Canadian architect, but he has been living in UK for 20 years, and he is associated with a British architect with St. John something. So these two architects are doing really good architecture based on the knowledge of history. And in the book, he says that actually there's a quote that I like a lot, that the search for new forms is tautology. Tautology means the banal repetition of, wait, let me search for the definition of tautology.
Yeah.
People students from ETH do internships with them. He does teaching.
Nice.
No, but until he reaches the point, he finishes.
Okay, so tautology is the needless repetition of an idea. So Adam Caruso says that trying to create new forms is needless repetition, because, or it's like trying to create a new color. I mean, there's no new colors, there's no new forms. Forms has been existed since forever. I mean, it's like if you talk about the Platonic idea of the forms, I mean, and I think this kind of historical sense in order to design architecture is one of the characteristics of architecture itself. I mean, if you read about all the architects around history, all over the history, all of them knew about history. So, I mean, I think that any school should teach about history. In Mexico, in my university, they renew the program, and now they have classes of history of Mexican architects and urban pre-Hispanic architecture, urban design. I mean, not urban design, but the urban history of pre-Hispanic civilization, which is fabulous. I mean, I think it's
No, by the way, like, don't get me wrong, I really appreciate that historical analysis. It's very valuable. Also, it creates the awareness of localness and working always within the context. That's, I appreciate, and I think it should be like universal value of architecture. We don't design a glass, we design something living in the context, in the urban context, in the historical context. I really like those kind of things in Italian architecture. It's just, even in theory, I would more appreciate if they leave some room for, like, when it comes to acknowledging that great civilizations, okay, like their historical analysis, even based on like pre-Renaissance, like Roman civilization, you should, like, there is literally a theoretical gap that denial other civilizations. Like, my problem is more in theory rather than the way they execute, like that deep analysis in the context and really carrying all the other historical environment there. It's I don't think like me and Amal has any problem with that. Like, also, we are not even like very critical about that.
Also, for me, that we're doing, for example, we're doing history, a course that was in history that didn't have a lot of critique when you look into history itself. Because in the end, even when you look into history, there's a lot of schools of thought that talk about how history and the way it's written is very biased. And so the understanding that when you try to look into history, to try to look at it from a critical perspective becomes important. And so the way we were taught about history, and usually with architecture, which needs to be more critical because architecture is something that affects people's lives in a very large scale, it is not very critical, and it just looks at things from a very narrow perspective. And so being Eurocentric to a certain extent when it comes to aesthetics or design is is not a problem in itself, but when it comes to theoretical framework or how you look into history, it needs to be a little bit more open to understanding otherness and to understand the different histories that are available. So when you create a design in a context that is different, you can actually look into the locality and try to study it in a critical point of view and not just take it as it is. And so this is where we kind of differ, not in the context of, but you know, the framework of it.
And because that mentality also sometimes create, if you look at things only within your own historical values, let's say you design in Porto in a Portuguese context, in different history, different aesthetical sense, or even in like in Gaza, I don't remember like what Morocco, in any other context, you still push your own historical understanding and aesthetics into another context.
Yes, yes.
I mean, the other day I was looking at, though it's not related to architecture, the issue that you have brought is similarly, I mean, it's seen over here, especially in the United States, especially with the African-American people. So what they have done is like all the history books of American students have been whitewashed. So they don't have anything about the African-American people, and they portray them as happy slaves or something like that. And it was very disturbing. And that's when a few of the African-American authors stepped into the scene, and they started, it's very recently, maybe after the George last year's after riots and stuff, that's when they started taking notice, like, oh, we shouldn't allow all these things to creep into our day-to-day lives without we being part of it. So they tried to make a strong emphasis, saying that all our school books need to be rewritten or edited, not rewritten, edited to be much more inclusive of different aspects of the society.
Yeah,
so
sorry.
That's what
go.
So that's what I'm saying. I think we might have to create such an avenue or something for maybe regional architects or regional thinkers or philosophers who have a much more global much more regional understanding with a global emphasis to in terms of architecture, could try to bring in their own culture into the theoretical part of the architecture, and maybe try to better it, maybe try to push the envelope at least a bit ahead.
Yeah, I mean, about the situation that you are talking about United States, I mean, you're talking about the African American, but what about the Native American? I mean, in Mexico, we have this kind of the way Mexico has been founded is in a deep relation with the pre-Hispanic history. I mean, even the name Mexico is pre-Hispanic. I mean, it's an indigenous word. So our culture is deeply rooted in the history of Mesoamerica, in the Aztecs, the Mayas, etc. But United States, they totally eradicated the native people. I mean, Mexico and United States are totally different, even though we have been colonized by Europeans. But the way they teach history in Mexico is totally different the way they teach the history in United States. And I think this kind of sociocultural background in each country affects either politics, science, architecture itself, sociology, I mean, all the disciplines. And I think that's quite I think an idea to consider, but especially in architecture, I was thinking about the thing you said about the material, Vargas. I remember that I read this essay by Kenneth Frampton to critical regionalism. And I think this is one of the best essay, not essay by, this one of the best manifestos in contemporary architecture, because you came to realize that you can't impose your, I mean, for example, if they, for example, you know the Museum Cumex in Mexico City by David Chipperfield.
Yeah, yeah.
So he studies the history of modern Mexico. So I think that if you're doing a project, for example, here in Mexico we have like many different environments and many different cultures. It's not the same a house in the north where it can be, it can snow, or either it's very hot in summer and it's very cold in winter. It's very different to the south where it's like jungle and there's a lot of humidity and it's quite hot. So you cannot design this glass architecture everywhere. I mean,
yeah, that's true.
So I think that knowledge of the context without imposing your own history, because this is as Amal says, it's very I don't know how to say it. What was the word you say, Amal?
I don't know what that
I mean, yeah, like trying to impose your own. I mean, of course,
there's no bias, without bias.
Yes,
yeah,
yes, it's biased.
I don't know. It's to me, sometimes it's using this locality as an architectural characteristic and value is a bit too symbolic to me. I don't really like. There might be also other solutions, but they are using these options. I don't know.
You mean cliché?
Cliché or like innovative, but very symbolically. So I think the problem is architecture is so separated from the history, ideology, and in general cultural context. So we are like trying to understand all these problems very isolated manner within the architectural vocabulary, and it's hard, like without understanding this current happenings in the world, like political appropriation, no, cultural appropriation,
yeah,
and all those stuff. Like when we look at our new architectural projects with those lens, it seems like completely different to me. Like, okay, like nice, like high quality architecture, it functions very well, it has a good budget, there's no bad intention behind that building, but it can be still very problematic in different ways. So my point is just being critical of everything.
Yes. There's one building that I'm fascinated about, is this Kengo Kuma building in an old village where he used this kind of
where, Daniel, I didn't understand. Where?
Kengo Kuma, he made in a I don't know where, I mean in Japan. He used like a high-tech building but with materials of the local village.
Yeah.
And
I mean, you are talking about.
Let me search.
Okay.
I think you're talking about the building with the wooden structure and leaves from the trees, right? Like a
yes.
Maybe you can share your screen.
Really? I can?
Yes.
Okay.
But you have to make him host.
No, wait.
No, I don't know how.
No, I'm saying more people can. Then there's a
Share screen. I found it.
yeah.
Okay.
Because I wasn't I didn't add it before, so now everyone
Can
can.
you see it?
Yes.
Yes.
This one.
Yeah, that one. Yeah.
Is, I mean, because the city Yusukara is a very ancient building material in that city, and he's using the vernacular language and doing a contemporary architecture. I context, the culture, the environmental factors, but you cannot repeat. You have to create something new from this kind of data that you are having from the context. And I think this has been critical. I mean, this has been also innovative, and it's kind of a creative approach to develop architecture. I mean, if you go impose your own views on the of your own cultural values, I mean, you can also propose as an architect when they hire you, is because the client knows what kind of things you do. I mean,
I think it can be very useful, like in this context, but it can be also dangerous if it becomes like just a stylistic option.
Exactly.
Like when you think about vertical gardens, like if you critique only the stylistic and like in terms of materials choice and other stuff, also it's just the makeup of the architecture, but the choice of doing that project or not doing is still another solution, no? What was the name of the architects? Boeri. Yeah, like when it comes to really controversial projects, do you understand like what I'm trying to say? They might choose like vernacular architectural vocabulary and local materials, and it seems like a green and nice project.
It doesn't.
Yes.
Makeup.
Yes. But the project itself just very dangerously commercial.
I remember my professor.
Antithesis of
no, but my professor, like, because I remember I followed this issue because it was a very big deal in Milan, because my thesis professor was against that idea, because he was saying that, for example, with vertical gardens, the problem with the vertical Bosco Verticale, a vertical forest that was done by Stefano Boeri, like the amount of effort that was put into putting actual trees and water and stuff into the building kind of loses its point, instead of making people put an effort into preserving parks so that you can just superficially say that the building is sustainable. But in the end, you could do it in a different way instead of putting so much effort, because in the end, to have a tree in a balcony in a vertical building is going to put a lot of effort, a lot of materials, and it makes the person who lives there have the false idea that they can use as much electricity or whatever kind of consumption because their building is green, when in reality it isn't, just because there's a few trees. And so there was a discussion that, like, is that the real solution to these kind of problems, or is this a superficial solution of, okay, building trees, sustainable, okay, we're done, let's just find a way to do it, instead of actually looking into the core of things?
Yes, it's like Coca-Cola. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
It's like Coca-Cola trying to be Black Lives Matter, or trying to be LGBTQ, you know? It's like, oh yes, we are just being a false prophet, you know?
It doesn't actually contribute to the core issues.
Yes, I mean, and again, as an architect, you have to be very coherent
Yeah.
with your idea and what you propose. I mean, you have to be very critical and not just trying to, I mean, you can create, but not just trying to use a false flag, I mean, a false, uh, how to say it, a
False narrative.
yes, a false narrative, yes.
Yeah, in any scenario, I'm quite happy with this kind of concept, like questioning the written history, like institutional criticism is like getting hype right now. And I think anyways, it's a good thing. But of course, there's like some architects, some people will try to exploit this concept.
Yeah.
And architecture, it's so tricky sometimes, like because we don't have very concrete parameter to judge the quantity.
Yeah.
No, sorry,
Quality.
quality of the
Quality of the
architecture.
Yeah.
I mean, because architecture is still an art. I mean, if it was only science,
Yeah.
if it was only science, I mean,
That's true.
Also because it stays for a long time, and with changing and like changing contexts and situations, it's not as easy as if you're creating a small product. If someone is doing a product that works in the kitchen or in any kind of thing that people use, that kind of has an element of design and functionality, like architecture, it's easy to replace it every 2 to 3, 4, 5 years. Architecture, because it stays and it doesn't just affect the internal part, it also affects the external with the urban, like it affects the urban context, how people navigate their everyday life. That's why it becomes more complex, because then it's not even just art or science or engineering, it becomes a social, anthropological, cultural aspect that affects all of these things. And so I think also a lot of time architectural schools, especially for example, my experience in Sudan, because it was built after colonial history, where we only had colonial architecture. It was done just to create buildings, but not to have a theory of architecture. And so the issue was, when you just create buildings as if it was just, just putting some bricks on top of each other and that's it, it really affects how people experience it, and it affects then how the city is developed and how people within it live their lives. And I think sometimes it's a very naive way to think in certain contexts. I'm not going to say no, when architecture is just seen as that, like engineering, and that's it, like just build a building and that's it. And so I think it's very important to have a conversation about how architecture should include different fields and different studies that are not just within the realm of building science per se.
Also, it makes me think that the marketability of architecture, especially in Europe, like when you think of cultural tourism, or like you literally market the architecture in terms of like attracting the tourist. That's why it's become like more and more important. When you think of Italy, like how many millions of tourists are visiting Italy just because of the architecture.
Amal, now that you were talking about Sudan, you just remind me the graphics of Hassan Fatih.
Yeah.
I'm gonna share you the screen.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Can you see it now?
Yeah.
Hassan
Fatih.
Hassan Fatih, yeah.
Yes, I mean, look
Is
at this.
he Indian?
Yeah.
No,
No, he's not Indian, but
from Egypt. This is all in
Egypt,
the Nubian areas of Egypt, in the south of Egypt.
But even not only the architecture, but also the graphics, how he represents. I mean, this is a manifesto. This is very aware of history, cultural, materiality, environment. I mean, this, I think this is how an architect should be. I mean, to have the knowledge of so many things in order to create a dialogue with your environment. I mean, with your cultural context. I mean, look at this graphic. I mean,
No,
it's like
Yep.
it's a plan, an isometric, an elevation, but also has this kind of particularity of the Egyptian culture that makes you. I mean,
Yeah.
I think Hassan Fatih was a really good architect. I mean,
But
Yep.
do you think in like general architectural education, the purpose of education giving this sensibility?
I mean, I think have you ever read this book? No, it's not a book. Sorry, it's like an essay of T.S. Eliot, the British poet.
Mm-hmm.
He has this essay called "The Talent, the Individual, the Tradition and the Individual Talent." I'm gonna send it to you guys via email. I mean, he said that a good poet should know about history, the traditions of your culture, but you also have to add your individual talent. And I think that you have to be creative. Because if a school tells you, oh, this is the tradition, you have to do it this way, this way, this way, it's killing your creative aspect. I mean, architecture, I repeat, is an art form.
Yes.
So you have to add values and your personal understanding. I mean, your creativity. I mean, of course, I can use the brick, you know, and everyone has been using the brick, but you can create a different thing with the brick.
Yep. I mean, this especially happened to me initially with a naive understanding of architecture. Like after my undergrad, I was like, okay, once I become a much more like once I learn about more architecture, I would be able to do hundreds and thousands of buildings maybe in the future. But once I came to the a global understanding of what architecture means and the material, culture, and once I figured out, oh my God, I don't want to create hundreds of buildings. I just want to do maybe 20 or 30 buildings throughout my lifetime. That would be a great thing. No, I don't want to create like hundreds of buildings. It also changed my whole perspective towards architecture itself. No, I don't want to be like other guys who would be like doing many projects. Maybe if I do at least one building a year, that would be enough for my lifetime, and I would be happy just doing what making much more sensible spaces using that.
People forget that not creating is also an architectural choice.
I
Yeah.
It's not rentable, but
yeah.
I mean, at least the problem with my city is that there's a lot of investment in the development of habitational and offices, buildings, and commercial, and there's a lot of construction, but all of them are bad.
Yes.
I mean, so as an architect, you have to, I mean, because the people in power that has the economic power to produce buildings, they are not focused on the artistic values of architecture. They just want business. And there are a few architects that are doing really good architecture in business way. And I think that's, I mean, as an architect, you have to defend your city, your context against deprivation of.
But I think, no, I was gonna say, like Ezra's point earlier about how Italians are so involved in architecture and art and that kind of understanding, and I think sometimes the exclusivity of architecture or art in other scenarios makes it so much easier for those kind of people to create these kind of buildings that don't work or don't function. But when societies have a say and have an understanding about how these things contribute also to their city and their life, then they could have, I'm not saying they always have more power, but then there could be more of a conversation about how these kind of buildings shouldn't be done if they don't work, like they don't function properly. But in a lot of times, there's not a lot of conversations when it comes to how architecture is done and how it relates to the city as a whole. So only the rich people that have money have access, because there's no conversations, or no, I'm not saying governments need to have a control, but at least if there's a conversation, there can be a little bit more pressure to not create these kind of buildings. I don't know.
I think that if a building, I mean, but I mean, there should be like a, I mean, if you say government, I mean, the bureaucracy is like shit.
Yeah.
At least in Mexico, bureaucracy, I mean, it doesn't work. But if you're gonna present a building, there should be like architect critics that they could accept or deny the building. I mean, I don't know.
Yeah, I think it's also a matter of social governmental policies, like how transparent these procedures, how much like publicly involved.
It's interesting to say that, because I've seen like few countries, maybe like in New Zealand and certain areas in US too, where if you're trying to build a building within certain context, you can't go, they would establish a clear rule where you need to embrace the typology of the architecture beside your buildings. And if all the buildings in your neighborhood are 2 stories or 3 stories high, you could go only till 2 stories or 3 stories high. And it might, you could interpret in different ways, but those are the restrictions that they try to portray. And in terms of materiality, they could say you could use brick, but they won't, brick or clay, but they won't specify the application, which means you could align it as a brick facade, or maybe a clay tiled house, or different kind of way of putting onto that as a facade. But it's within the realm of that, using those small material palette that they are provided.
By the way, in Italy, it's very similar in the rural areas. If you want to construct something new or like renovate a project, there's like very strict rules about materials and the story and everything.
Especially in the historical context. It's very hard to do something very new. Like even if you do, but it needs to be within certain regulations.
Yeah, well, maybe I haven't seen, maybe they don't show that much in the internet or the architecture pages. They don't show the bad architecture in Europe. But if you see in Europe, they are really responsible with the context. I mean, because Europe is like, they have so much history. They have.
Did you see, Amal, what was the stuff you sent me via Twitter? In Lyon, they were demolishing a chapel. No, like it was even bigger than chapel. Like it was a very historic building. They were just demolishing to make a shopping mall.
Really?
Yeah.
That, I mean.
Yeah.
Yeah, they don't talk that much. I mean, I didn't knew, but
when I first saw it, I thought it's in Turkey, I realized it wasn't.
Yeah.
I wouldn't surprise if it wasn't Turkey.
It's the same place that they have that, what do you call it? That museum that he gave it to us, what's his name, in Lille. You remember we got that modern museum that was built like in a garden in France on a park or something? And so let me just...
Maybe you can share the screen.
Yeah, I'll share the screen now. Okay. Okay, here it is. This is the church that was destroyed. It's 1886. And so they closed it, they destroyed it.
No way.
Started already gutting it, and 2 days ago they actually showed the picture because they want to design.
That's the new project.
I mean,
And there's also already like a museum in Lille or a monument, something like that, that was like very modern.
But I saw the videos they were demolishing.
Yeah, they demolished it.
San Joseph.
they demolished the church already?
Yeah.
Let me open Google. Bing is just so bad.
Why you are using Bing?
Because I'm using, what is this called? I'm using, because I have too many open tabs on Chrome. I can't.
It gives me anxiety.
I don't want to see how many ones I have there. Yes. Destruction. There you go. Here you go. It was on Twitter. Like they didn't even write a story about it. It was so sad. So obviously, because I have too many tabs open. Okay, there you go. This is it. It was so sad. I couldn't believe like this was happening in France. Like anywhere else, and even if it's like only 200, like 150 years old, look at how they're doing. And they didn't even like move it or do anything, like just completely destroyed. And people were saying that there's so many, you know, like, and this is what they want to build. This is how it looked like.
It's not even.
So sad. So sad.
Yeah.
Because they just like, they're going into things that are so much more modern. I wanted to find like, they had a point about the modern structure in Lille. And I remember like we had it, like it was a monument or something. So the mayor is they're continuing trying to do things that are modern, which is okay, but you don't need to do it in that kind of way. Modern
They could do.
I think it's done by one of those famous architects. I know, I saw it before.
Yeah, it's kind of familiar.
There's all these white boxes. So they have like a kind of need to do these kind of new modern stuff.
Isn't it the architect came Manto Architectura? No, no.
Unless I see who the architect is. So this was a refurbishment and an extension, which makes sense because Manuel Gotand architecture. I don't know. No. Okay. I thought I saw it before, but
it looks very sad. I mean, just white boxes.
And so, like, I thought that there would be laws and regulations that protect these things, but I'm not sure. Maybe in France, the regulations start 200 years ago, maybe, I don't know.
I mean, there are always legal gaps.
Yeah.
Yeah.
In
It's interesting.
theory, like even in Turkey, there are amazing laws, but there are gaps when they're ambitious enough. They find a way to destroy, like very
I think
important.
when it comes from the government.
Yeah, especially when it comes specifically destroy the collective memory. Like,
Yeah.
destroying certain how to say piazza or like buildings to destroy the memory is very dangerous. But yeah, I don't think French government is any better than Turkish one. Maybe we can talk about a bit our that workshop projects, like migrating monuments, that we are looking for fundings. And as soon as we get, we would like to have like study some particular monuments. Now we had like made a list of in west side of Turkey, because it was ancient Greece, how to say, region, and there are so many important like monuments. Yes. Our idea is to giving a workshop to like give some creative freedom to the participants to take these monuments and insert in another context. So it's also maybe a creative thinking of like that monuments are beyond the national ownership, because at the time when they were built, there was not a concept of nations, and they are in danger under like many different crises, like political crisis. In like, for example, in Syria, there is that war conditions going on, and there so many monuments are already destroyed, or they're like ecologic crisis. So for us, like to study them properly and like document them. We are not talking about like serious technologies, like probably they are already done, but more like critical thoughts of monuments and inserting them in like collages or photomontage and other.
We want to have a critical dialogue about heritage, because in the end, in many places and in many situations, especially now with the COVID, like monuments are mostly forgotten and neglected, and not talking about Italy, for example, but in other places where it is something that is part of the history, not of just the place, but of the whole like world. And so these conversations sometimes came a bit late, for example, with the context of Syria. Like until they were destroyed, a lot of people didn't even know about the importance of these like Mesopotamian kind of heritage and monuments. And so even when just recreating them and putting them in different places, even if it's not real, and at sometimes it can give like not a serious effect, and maybe sometimes it could be in a absurd setting, but at the same time it can have a conversation about how like the importance of reimagining these heritage and how they can be, you know, included in the, you know, in the narrative, and not something that is just forgotten and left on the side for a bunch of people to just, you know, take care of it, and it's not part of everyone's history. And so our idea was to do this for here, because heritage is important for us, other than just, so we wanted to have that kind of discussion with architectural students or any type of graphic designers or whoever who are interested in doing the workshop.
It's interesting topic. I mean, just while you guys are speaking, I got an idea thinking that if most of the architectural paths, like maybe historical paths that we see today are could be in ruins, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I was thinking, is it worth to leave those pieces in ruins, or to rebuild them back to the glory and create a new purpose to that space? Because I was thinking, what I mean, it doesn't emphasize the importance of rebuilding back in their society. Like it's like in a philosophical way. Most of the cultures doesn't. I mean, if some maybe in back in like since I'm taking the example of Alexander, since he demolished so many cities back in the olden days throughout the world, and we would say, should we just leave it and say Alexander destroyed this in 300 century or back then, and we should leave it for the next 17 or 18th century saying, oh, it was demolished back then, and we should we worship, or I mean, should we idealize those kind of acts and leave it for the next coming centuries, or should we rebuild upon those and say, though it was demolished, we, I mean, as a society, try to rebuild that and bring a new life to those spaces? What are your ideas on that?
Mm. I was thinking also the monuments in India that Rahul was showing us during Macaco project. It is hard. I think it's also very based on the location, like if there is actual living possibilities there or not. Like, I don't support the idea of bringing some artificial life there, but if there are potentials, I mean, it also depends on how rare, how valuable these monuments. If they are really highly protected, I don't think even the policies would allow to touch in any sense. But I think in any scenario, like digitally or in the mental space, like digital space, there is no, it doesn't bother to reproducing them and thinking and talking about them. Especially we're thinking with Amal, like still in the frame of like representational crisis, and that concept of migration, the monuments kind of related to migration of people, that they, like most of the time, the migrants, their connection with the monuments, with their history is like very important. Like during the war, like when there is an attack on the monuments, there is a huge sociological effect on the people. And as I remember, Daniel, you were doing that. No, you won architectural competition in Rome with Politecnico people, no? About ruins. You made a project with Bogoni,
the
no?
Piranesi Prix. Yes.
Yeah, like you can give some insights about Italian way of looking at ruins.
Yes.
Well, it was like a master project. It was like a connection. First, it was the connection of the idea of the Piranesi Prix is like it's about giving life to old ruins without making intervention in the ruins. I mean, in the sense that, for example, this one in Tivoli, the Villa Adriana, it was about how you integrate the ruins into the economy, you know? So there was like a bike lane that connects the villa with the city. And then there was like outside of the buffer zone, there was like we designed like a mall, hotel, museum. I mean, and then inside the ruins, there was this kind of archaeological villa, which was ephemeral and low impact buildings made of wood. But the design was totally an abstraction of the ruins, which it was quite nice. I mean, it's because the ruins are so beautiful. If you see, let me search for Villa Adriana ruins.
Yeah, maybe for Barga, we should explain a bit. Villa Adriana is, I think, one of the most important ancient Rome ruins, and it's outside of Rome, so like you need to stay in a hotel that maybe 1 hour away.
Exactly. I mean, the idea of the project that we did is like to integrate, to attract tourism, to make accommodation for people closer to the ruins. I mean, look at these things. I mean, so beautiful. I mean, and it's a huge complex. So, I mean, for example, if you like to go to a museum and you watch the paintings and the old paintings, etc., etc. I mean, you appreciate the history through art, and when you go to a place like Villa Adriana, you appreciate so much. I remember we did a trip with the Politecnico in Milano to Pompeii, and we saw so many villas, Roman villas. I mean, you learn so many things. I mean, it's like an open book. I mean, so the project we did, let me see if I have some images here.
And it took a couple of 100 years, like I think from Augustus to, I don't remember which emperor.
It's from Adrian. And that's why it's called
Adrian, yes. He was traveling also to Egypt and copying, like bringing some stuff to that. Adrian Villa was like kind of early example of open air museum also.
So can you see? This is the, like,
we don't, like, it didn't change for me.
This is Villa Adriana, and the connection we did by a bike lane to the city.
We can't see. I can't see the project.
We can't see.
Yeah, stop.
Wait. Let me search. Wait.
Okay, yeah, just share again. Okay, perfect.
Can you see it now?
Yeah.
Okay, so this is Villa Adriana, and we did kind of a bike lane to Tivoli, and then there's this connection, a landscape design. Let me see if we have the landscape design here.
It's still not moving away.
This is Villa Adriana. It's huge. It's a huge complex.
We don't see, like, we just see the file from outside.
Really?
Yeah, I think you need to select pictures tab or something. Yeah.
Wait.
Yeah, just share your screen. Don't select something specific, because if you change it, it won't change. Just share your screen. Yes.
Thank you, man. So did you saw the first one?
No, this is the first one we see.
Okay. Let me show you. No, this one.
Okay.
So this is Tivoli and this is Villa Adriana, and we did like a bike lane to connect the ruins with the city. And then this is, I think this part over here, this is the river. So the bike lane is all along the river. And then we did here like a commercial complex, hotels, and then an entrance to Villa Adriana, which is like a landscape design, which divides the access and the exit.
Mm.
So everything that was supposed to bring tourism into the zone closer to the Villa Adriana was outside of the buffer zone.
Mm.
And then in the buffer zone, we just did like landscape. This is the part that I did. Let me, no, wait. This was my contribution. If you see here, it's like a square.
Yeah.
Wait, let me search if I have this image. Wait. No, I don't know where I have it.
It's okay.
No. Well, so what Soto de Moura says is that there are these like peristyle atoms, like a square, square, square. So we repeated the square like an impluvium, like a villa, like a Roman domus. So this is a low impact structure made of wood inside of Villa Adriana, and this was to host the archaeologists in the zone. So yeah, it was a nice competition.
But I wanted to comment on that because when we were doing like the course in architectural design and history, we had one of the courses was just teaching us about the different school of thoughts when it came to preservation and restoration of old buildings. And so there has been discussions since the 19th century, in the 1800s, of should, for example, buildings be restored? Should they be restored stylistically? Should it be kept like it is with a differentiation between what is old and what is new? And so when it comes to dealing with ruins or old buildings, this depends in the end with the laws and regulations of each different country, because these things don't change from country to country. And then depending after how much these laws and regulations are open to the school of thoughts of the specific restorer or preservation specialist at that point. And so, for example, a lot of buildings here, they would allow you, if a building has a certain amount of years, to, for example, break a wall and enter a new glass door. But for example, if it's the Colosseum or something that is very old and very important, you can't touch it. You can only just put structural elements to make it not fall down. And so in the end, like multiple things, it has different schools of thought. And so then, like Ezra said, it depends on the uniqueness, history, creativity, and the structure itself. If it's gonna fall, does it need someone to help it stand up? Is there 50 of them around Italy, for example, and you can use one and just add things to it? So that all of these things depend then.
And also there's the domination of UNESCO.
Oh,
Yeah.
UNESCO has like no control, technically. They can just kick you out of the list, but I wish UNESCO could control more for some countries. Not really, but I'm saying in some situations where you have shitty government,
It's useful, yeah.
like our old government, which used to call like ancient statues, like, what did they call them? Pagan, I don't know what the name is for, like these pagan statues that people used to pray to. We have a name for it. It's
Yeah, pagan statue. It's like ideal.
Idols, exactly. Thank you. They called like ancient statues built 3,000, 2,500 years ago, or 2,000 years ago, like idols. And at one point, some of them wanted to destroy them, but thank God they didn't do something stupid like that. But it happened for a Buddha statue in Afghanistan.
ISIS destroyed many sculptures, right?
They destroyed like a very huge Buddha statue that was the largest Buddha statue
Oh yeah.
in Pakistan. And then Taliban came and they destroyed it. And so at some points, it is important for there to be not UNESCO, but like, yeah, a collective importance to, you know, historical monuments.
Mm-hmm.
By the way, it's almost 2 hours.
Yeah, we have to.
Maybe we can finalize in 5 minutes.
Wrap up, okay.
But it was like really nice. It was that's how I was imagining, like
You don't feel
talking about architecture
and
and urbanism and culture like freely without any oppression.
but so we're also like we're thinking of properly launching in around when Ezra June, the
Yeah.
website and everything. And so in the future, we are considering to do multiple projects. It's not just going to be like this in heritage and so like, but anything related to museums, architecture, art discourse, things that have to do with, you know, other point of views and challenge biases and conversations that we were having now. And so one of the reasons that we're having these conversations with the people in our network is that we're also hoping in the future that when we have new projects, or even if we don't have, but if people are interested in similar projects, that we can collaborate to work in these kind of fields. And so after we launch, at any point, if we have project, we're going to create what you call an emailing list, and we'll have our website and all our social media, so you can see what we're doing, and we'll contact people who have projects. And at the same time, if there's anything that you feel like might be interesting that we might all we could collaborate in, we'll be more than happy if we have the time and available to create projects that are related into these fields.